Okay, it looks like we're live.
Yep.
All right, thank you so much for coming, everyone. My name is McTady Bowden, and I am an equity trainer and strategy specialist at the Center for Racial and Gender Equity here at YWCA Lancaster. And I am going to talk to you all today a bit about the idea of fast fashion and how it is tied to white supremacy. And I know that fast fashion is a term that a lot of people probably don't know much about, and that is totally okay. And I promise you that during this presentation, I'm not going to tell you that you have to start making your own clothes. That's what someone said to me before we started, like, Mick, what do I wear today? That is not why we're here. This is not about shaming. It's just about trying to understand and learn what fast fashion is. So I thought what we could do is start with this YouTube video from Teen Vogue that explains this term a bit. So I'm going to play this for us. It's about 5 minutes. Oh, of course, there's going to be an ad. I apologize. But I've got the ad muted, so at least I did that for you.
We all love to shop, and these days, the newest styles and clothes are cheaper than ever. You can literally snag a dress for $4, which is basically the price of a vanilla latte. But buying cheap comes at a high cost. And I know, I hear you. You're like, Wembley, what does that actually mean? And that basically means that fast fashion just works on exploitative labor conditions and is destroying the environment. Over the last 2 centuries, as the world has changed, our relationship to clothes has dramatically changed too. From an era where clothing was bespoke or tailor-made for each individual to the ready-to-wear era where pre-made clothing came in standardized sizing, and the current era of fast fashion. The fashion industry today looks nothing like it did in the past. And of course, not all change is good. Obscene amount of clothes, stealing independent designers' ideas, low wages, unsafe conditions and harassment, factory workers sewing pleas to help in their clothing. Yikes. But before we get into all of that, what exactly is fast fashion? You're right if you think it sounds like fast food. It's cheap, quick, and of questionable quality. Back to the topic at hand. If fast fashion isn't bespoke and isn't ready to wear, then what is it? To answer that question, we need to travel to a small village in Galicia, Spain, called La Coruña. In 1963, a man named Amancio Ortega Gaona launched a company which would go on to become the biggest fashion retailer on earth. That company is now known as Zara Inditex. You may recognize its most famous holding, Zara. Ortega and Zara pioneered the fast fashion model. There are 4 major points. First, vertical integration. That's just a fancy way of saying the company does it all in-house, from design and manufacturing and selling clothes. This helps streamline costs and optimize the production process. Fast fashion is all about feedback. Designers receive data on what sells and what doesn't as often as daily. They often conduct field research on what's trending, and it's pretty much by just going out and seeing what people are wearing on the street. Onto a speedier design to retail cycle. In fast fashion, the emphasis is on fast. The time it takes to make clothing is now a fraction of what it once was. For Zara, which leads the industry, it just takes 5 weeks. Instead of fixed seasonal collections, fast fashion outlets generate the lion's share of profits through designs produced in season. Ready-to-wear collections are made and debuted 1 full season ahead of time. Finally, fast fashion is dependent on cheap labor, and those savings are passed on to the customer. Fashion has always run on people power more than anything else. Currently, 1 in 6 humans on Earth works in the fashion industry. It's massive, and for the most part, those humans live in developing countries. But cheap labor comes at a high cost. With globalization, the world's economies became increasingly linked. The promise of fast fashion was trendy clothes at a low cost, therefore democratizing fashion, in the words of Amancio Ortega. At the same time, companies like Forever 21 and H&M would provide jobs to workers in the developing world. It didn't work out exactly like that. Fast fashion companies have come under fire for exploiting workers. This has meant everything from child labor to forcing workers to handle dangerous chemicals and being grossly underpaid for long hours without a break. In 2013, a preventable structural failing caused a building in Bangladesh to collapse, killing more than 1,100 garment workers who were trapped inside, and injuring more than 2,500. The Rana Plaza disaster was the deadliest garment factory accident in history. And while we now spend less than 3% of our annual income on clothing, compared to about 10% in the 50s, We have an absurd amount of clothing because fast fashion means that clothing is disposable. Fashion is also terrible for the environment. Long story short, more clothes made much more quickly for a fraction of the cost means a glut of cheap clothing piling up in our landfills. To get a sense of the sheer volume of clothing we're talking about here, let's do a quick rundown of fast fashion's environmental impact by the numbers. 150 billion, the number of new garments produced each year. That's more than 20 garments per person on Earth. 2.5 billion, the number of pounds of fabric waste removed from the waste stream, according to the Council for Textile Recycling. 60, the percent by which the amount of clothing we own has increased between 2000 to 2014, according to Greenpeace. But we keep clothes for half as long as we did just 15 years ago, leading to a massive amount of waste. 10, the percent of the global carbon footprint in the fashion industry is responsible for. There is no question that fashion is contributing to the effects of climate change. While clothing is recyclable, the amount of clothing produced has far outstripped our capacity to recycle it. It's gotten so bad that in April, China, which was previously a top destination for recycled textiles, has officially banned them. And in North America, the city of Markham, Ontario, in Canada, is the first municipality to ban textile waste from landfills. But wait, it gets even worse. Fashion is the second biggest polluter of clean water on the planet. Toxic chemicals used to dye and treat clothing have been linked to miscarriages, birth defects, and cancer. You have to ask yourself, is it worth it? We all love to shop, and
hold on. Let me see how I can. There we go. So that video is a great overview. It's obviously it's incredibly upsetting, and you all are probably really bummed out right now, and I apologize. But this is something that we, especially if we're in the United States, we don't have to think about. We put clothes on, and we haven't made them, so we're completely kind of separated from the means of production, but all of our clothing is homemade. Every item that we put on is made by human hands. I think a lot of us kind of, I don't know, it feels like it's 2020. Aren't these things just made by robots? No, there are still that image. That's a recent image of the people sitting in what is essentially a sweatshop making our clothing. So right now, there's some specific things that are happening that's really important. First of all, during COVID, we've seen a huge decrease in shopping for clothes. I don't know about you, but I keep getting these ads like, oh, come buy these shoes. And I keep thinking, why? I'm very lucky that I'm able to work from home. I don't need new clothes right now. I certainly don't need new shoes. I'm not leaving the house. So I know I'm not alone there. Those of us who are lucky enough to be able to work safely from home, we're not buying clothes. So these global retailers they have these record profits still because they make so much money. But instead of tapping into some of that, into the bonuses for their CEOs or designers, they are simply not paying their garment workers. Major retailers like Primark, which is a huge retailer, especially in the UK, but also Kohl's and Nike have not paid their workers or have paid their workers a tiny fraction of what they're owed during this global pandemic. So we have people who have been laid off, but also people who have been continuing to work but are not getting paid. Bangladeshi workers making Lululemon, which is there's one right downtown in Lancaster. It's an upscale women's, I believe it's only women's clothing, women's workout wear. They sell really expensive leggings. They're almost $100. There was a huge report that came out last year where Bangladeshi workers who are making their clothing talked about beatings, verbal abuse, and Bangladeshi workers in the garment industry, the minimum wage is 18% of a living wage. A lot of people are making approximately $143 to $150 a month working full time. Workers are targeted for unions. If they are unionizing, they are, especially the garment workers who are heading up the union, they are being targeted with harassment. There have been reports of assault. I'm sorry about the typos there, about assault, being stalked, groped, and even sexual assault. Those are common events that garment workers have to face. and garment workers are globally mostly women. So all of this stuff is kind of combining to make fast fashion something that's incredibly bad for people. But there are also horrific environmental impacts. One of the articles that I read when I was doing research for this presentation said that there was a joke in one town in India that you can tell what color is trending by the color of the water because of the horrible runoff from all of these chemicals. There are places where the water is undrinkable. It's completely toxic because of the tanning practices for leather for making shoes and boots. Um, so this is from um, an environmental film that was made called River Blue that looks at the ways that the water is polluted from the fashion industry, and they found that 70% of rivers and lakes are contaminated by 2.5 billion gallons of wastewater that are produced by the textile industry. There is an incredible amount of water that goes into producing our clothing. When we buy jeans, for example, the average pair of jeans takes many, many gallons of water, like hundreds of gallons of water. That's especially true of the styles that are really common now. It used to be that denim would just be kind of straight denim, there was no stretch to it, and there wasn't really any fading. But now when we buy denim, when we're buying jeans, a lot of the styles have fading and they're made to look worn in. All of that is done with water by absolutely pelting the denim with water. And that's what gives us these softer denim fabrics and a more worn in look. Another group, Oceanwise, it's a marine conservation organization. They estimated that in 2019, US and Canadian households released over 870 tons of plastic microfibers into the ocean just from our laundry. So one of the things what that means is, I don't know if anyone's ever heard of microplastics, but they are tiny, tiny pieces of plastic that are shed by primarily the clothing that we wear. Clothing now is much more likely to be made by petrochemicals. Think of the workout clothes that we wear. We're not wearing cotton. We're wearing things that are meant to be moisture wicking and all of this stuff, but all of that is coming from plastic, which is petroleum. And every single time we wash our clothing, these tiny microscopic microplastics are getting washed into the ocean. Fish mistake them for food, and most humans have them in our bodies because they're so part of our water that they've become part of our food system. Like we're actually ingesting these things. So another thing that has caused a huge influx of clothing that we are discarding is the popularity of Marie Kondo's book, I forget what's the something Joy of Tidying Up. And she encourages people to get rid of a lot of the clothing in their closets. And it's not necessarily that her book is bad, but with people started just completely getting rid of all of their clothes and anything that it wasn't even just that it didn't fit or that it was old or it was out of style or worn out. It was, this doesn't bring me joy, so I'm going to get rid of it. And when we think, oh, it's a good idea, I'm going to donate my clothing. But a very small portion of our clothes that we donate actually end up on the floor of a place like, say, Goodwill. 16 million tons of textiles end up in landfills every year in the US. There is actually an entire industry in different African countries where discarded clothing from the United States is sold in by the pound at markets, and it's in these kind of giant vacuum sealed cubes, and you just buy a cube of clothes and you don't know what's in it, and then people sort through it, and again, a lot of that still ends up discarded. There's a great article that you can find online that's literally just titled "No One Wants Your Old Clothes." So we think when we discard things, when we say, oh, this does not make me happy, it doesn't spark joy. What we end up doing when we donate, we feel good, but the majority of what we donate does not help anyone. The majority of what we donate ends up in a landfill. Also, I know there's some people in the Zoom right now. If any of you have questions or comments, please feel free to unmute and just jump in. I can't see you because I'm sharing my screen, but please feel free to jump in. So the title of this was about fast fashion and white supremacy, and all of this comes together with capitalism and consumerism. So these fast fashion companies are creating and manufacturing a need. They are specifically designing clothes to fall apart. My grandmother used to tell me when I was younger about when she was young, and she and her sister, would often make their own clothes. But even when they didn't, they would pay attention to what was in fashion. And she would say, one year, let out the hem of a skirt if longer skirts were in fashion. She would shorten it the following season. You altered your clothing to make it last a long time. Whereas now we have a party to go to, we go get a new dress or a new shirt. That's not that might seem normal, but that way of living with clothing is relatively new. And it wasn't until after 1999, about really the early 2000s, that the concept of fast fashion started. And you can see from the video from Vogue, or from Teen Vogue, just how much of an impact that has had globally on us just in the 15 years or so since fast fashion became a concept. So there, Forever 21 is another big example. And I know some people are going to say, well, Forever 21 is now accepting clothes. That doesn't undo all of the damage they've done. That's just about greenwashing and trying to look better. They do have bins, I think, where you can turn in your old clothes, but that's still just going to a landfill. But what something like Forever 21, instead of having 4 seasons, they'll have 12 or 24 seasons. New clothes are constantly coming out so that we feel like we need to get them. Low prices and poor quality go hand in hand. That doesn't mean that if something is expensive, it's necessarily high quality. And it certainly does not mean, they've done studies that show that higher costs do not mean that the garment workers were actually paid fairly. It just means that that is going more to, all of that, all of the money that they're making is not going to the garment workers. So we can't kid ourselves. But low prices and poor quality go hand in hand. And what we see now is companies trying to compete to make things that they have so many places they can choose from, that garment production companies that are often, they tend to be in Africa and in Bangladesh, are two of the biggest areas. They will compete with each other. So if Walmart wants to buy, 1 million sweatshirts, one will say, I can make them for 95 cents. And the other will say, well, I can make them for 90. And that constant competition means that the workers are paid even less. Petroleum products going in, and then the combination of misogyny and the fact that the majority of the workers in the garment industry producing our clothes are women, and that the majority of the people who are producing our clothes are Black people, Indigenous people, and other people of color. All of that combines so that overwhelmingly, BIPOC, especially BIPOC women in the global South, are the most impacted by fast fashion, because it's not just the poor treatment, the fact that they don't have any real legal protection. All of that combines with the fact that fast fashion is also contributing in such a large way to global warming and climate change. So they are now also, BIPOC are much more likely to be affected by the horrific effects of climate change. So this is how fast fashion and white supremacy all go together. It's all part of a huge system of oppression. So there are a couple things we can do, but the most sustainable and the best item of clothing for human rights that you have, the best you can get is already in your closet. This is not something that we can buy our ways out of. This is not, oh, I need to get rid of all of my clothes and replace them. Absolutely not. And sometimes you see people who are slow fashion activists who are shaming other people for buying fast fashion. That's not really going to do anything. And I'm going to talk a little bit about why that is in a minute. But what we can do, the best thing to do is to preserve what we already have. So we can learn to mend our clothes. And I'm going to show everyone a quick video, about 3 minutes, that just gives a brief overview of 3 different mending techniques that are very easy to do. Committing to wearing our clothes more frequently. is also really important. There has become a stigma about re-wearing clothing. And I think a lot of us are probably realizing just how many of our clothes we have, but we don't wear if we are able to stay home or work from home more frequently right now. Committing to when you buy something, looking at it and saying, I'm going to wear this at least 12 times. There have been studies that show that most people wear an item of clothing 3 or 4 times before tossing it. So if we can commit to wearing an item of clothing more frequently, that can help. Uh, don't buy new clothes. That might be tough for some of us, right? We like to talk about retail therapy, but retail therapy is really just capitalism convincing ourselves that if we spend our money on something, we will fill the void in ourselves. And that is not how it works. When we buy something new, we might feel good for a little bit, but that happiness is fleeting. And then what do? We go shop more. So instead of buying new clothing, that doesn't mean we can't have new things. Just try to, if we reframe it and think about it as things that are new to us, that's a big difference. We can do a swap. Last year at my church, we organized a big clothing swap. Everyone brought in clothes and we were encouraged to basically shop one another's closets. It was really fun and it guaranteed that the clothes we wanted to get rid of that were in good shape weren't going to go in a landfill, but instead someone else would love them. Also, thrifting is great, even though the clothes that we donate likely are not, our old 5K t-shirts and all of those things, they're not going to end up on the Goodwill floor, most likely. But there are a lot of great things we can find in a place like Goodwill, or there's another one downtown I can't think of the name of, but thrift shops are a great place to go. If we are buying new clothing, we can support slow fashion if and when it's possible. But I say that with a real I think that's good, but I also have discomfort in recommending that. And the reason is that, first of all, slow fashion is very expensive. So I feel like that's essentially saying that we can sort of buy our virtues, that if someone cannot afford slow fashion, they are then bad. But if we can afford it, we are good. And that's not okay. But also, I mentioned greenwashing, which is just the process by which companies attempt to look environmentally good. Okay, well, that's not great phrasing, but you all know what I mean. I'm wearing an item of clothing I'm wearing a button down that when I first started learning about fast fashion, I purchased from a certain company that I really thought they were doing a good job because of all of the things that they said on their website. But the more digging I did, the more I realized that they just knew how to make it sound like things were produced in an environmentally friendly way and like their workers were being treated well. And I have some resources at the end that are great to consult if you want to learn more about this. Pushing brands to be transparent is a great thing to do. This is where social media can be wonderful. Every year, there is a campaign run by a company called I want to say it's For the Feel Fashion, or it is another organization that I have on my slides at the end, where people hold up signs and use the hashtag who made my clothes, and we tag brands, and we're constantly kind of pushing them to be more transparent. And it's kind of surprising what a response that gets. But you see brands reach out. When I've done it, I've actually had brands message me right away to talk to me about who made the clothes. And when you push, they are worried about looking bad. I mean, I don't personally really care if they do it for the right reasons. I just want them to pay people a living wage and make sure that they're not killing the environment more than they already are. And then also look for clothing producers that are unionized. Labor unions protect workers. So if we can look for that label when we purchase clothing, then that is a great way to kind of shop our values. Um, so I'm going to show us the basics of mending. This is only 3 minutes, and this concentrates on the idea of visible mending, which has become really trendy. A few years ago, actually, it was last year, I thought, oh, visible mending is really starting to make it, because there was a picture of Chance the Rapper, who's one of my favorite rappers on Instagram, and he was wearing jeans that I am 99.9% sure he bought already looking as if they were mended. So this is a great way to make clothing our own, and also it's a great conversation piece. People will often come up to me when I'm wearing my mended clothing and say like, "Oh, did you do that?" Okay. Okay, so that is, oops, I keep doing this, y'all. So that is one of the simple, like many quick free tutorials that I found on YouTube when I looked. I love this image called the hierarchy of needs that really went kind of viral a few years ago when people started really talking about visible mending. But the best thing I just want to reinforce is to use what you have instead of going out to buy something, even something as simple as no, unsubscribing to any clothing retailers that have our email addresses. I bought one thing from Kohl's 5 years ago, and I swear they email me 10 times a day. So hitting unsubscribe, because we get emails saying things are on sale, and then we'll say, "Well, the price is so good, I should probably just see. We're buying stuff we don't need and often stuff that we don't even want simply because we know it's on sale and therefore we have this idea that it's a good value. So unsubscribing from that is a huge, just an easy thing you can do. It'll take a minute or less for each retailer that will cut down on how much you spend and on the temptation to go buy things. If you want to buy something, look at it and wait 48 hours. Find it, really think about it. And if 48 hours later you cannot stop thinking about that item of clothing, okay. But if you're going to buy it, let's be more mindful of that. How can we put that clothing, that item of clothing, how's it going to work with other things we have? Can it fit into our wardrobe, or are we going to have to go out and buy other stuff to go with it? So if that's the case, maybe it's not worth it. Then again, really thinking about saving up and buying the best quality that we can afford so that we can take care of our clothes and they won't just end up in a landfill. Um, but as Audre Lorde said, the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. And the thing is, slow fashion is not a solution. It's just more capitalism. We need systemic change, and we're seeing things. There aren't really major global protections for garment workers. In September of this year, this just happened. Amnesty International stopped working for garment workers' rights in India because their bank accounts there were frozen. They were completely frozen out from paying their own people and taking care of their own employees who were there trying to help. Most US laws and global laws trying to protect garment workers were passed in 1999 or earlier. So before fast fashion was even a thing, and they are filled with loopholes. So for example, they say that an employee has to be paid minimum wage. But if you look at the amount of money someone makes for minimum wage in Bangladesh, it is not nearly enough to live on. It's 18% of a living wage. There are also rules that say, or laws that say, that as long as a company, they're liable, right? So the law currently says that a company is liable for any kind of horrible disaster like at Rana Plaza. But if the company itself is outsourcing the garment work, which is what they do, they're no longer liable. So all of these loopholes exist, and that's the biggest thing that we need. We can't depend on slow fashion and shopping our values to make systemic change in this way, because there are always going to be many of us who can't afford to shop our values, who have to rely on fast fashion because that's the only clothing we can afford. So we need to instead make sure that there is systemic change and there are laws put into place to protect people. So I had a couple of questions that I think we should consider. And originally I was thinking we could use a Padlet, but I thought those of you, no pressure, but those of you who are quote unquote in the studio right now, maybe we can talk about this a little bit if you feel comfortable. But even if you're not, if you're watching live on Facebook or you're watching this later, just think about the clothes you're wearing today. Just look at your outfit, your Zoom attire, your sweatpants with a button down if you're me, and think about, how long have I had these items of clothing? What's the oldest, sorry, not number, what's the oldest item of clothing, and what's the newest? Um, and do we know where they were made? Uh, if so, like, do we know where that is on the map? Can we think about the people who actually made our clothing? And then another thing to consider is, how often do we wear the items we're wearing today? And what goes into our decision to wear them more or less frequently? If we know, I think many of us have certain items in our closet that we wear constantly. So what is it about them? So when we really do need to replace clothing, can we look for something similar, knowing what we like and how often we are to wear it, so that we don't just buy things because they're cheap or on sale and just toss them? And I'm gonna stop sharing in a second. So if you're here on the Zoom, we can talk about this if you like. But I just wanted to share some of my resources. Fashion Revolution is the organization. It's just, if you Google them, it's fashionrevolution.org. They are the ones who do the Who Made My Clothes campaign. Clean Clothes Campaign is another nonprofit organization that does a ton of work around organizing workers and trying to look at the human rights and the environmental issues and the white supremacy issues that all come together in the fast fashion industry. The True Cost is a great documentary that is truly eye-opening. And I have not seen River Blue, but I used a bunch of their statistics from the movie. And then the image that I shared is the hierarchy of needs. So I'm going to stop sharing because I cannot stand sharing my screen and talking to people that I can't see. And see if like, did anyone learn anything from this? I don't know how familiar you all were with this concept of fast fashion, but I'm just, oh, hey, Jill. I'm just thinking maybe we could talk about it a little bit and what we've learned and yeah. What are you wearing today and how old is it? Like who's got the oldest item of clothing today?
See, Mick, I was like sitting here thinking about, your presentation and like me, I can't say I love shopping. I'm the kind of person I go into the store and I get overwhelmed because there's too much. But then sometimes, as you said, some people want to go out and spoil themselves because, that's what makes them feel good. I can definitely attest to that because I do that sometimes. But then I think about my closet. I'm like, what do I have? Like when you were saying, what is the oldest thing you have? I think about this sweater. I'm like, well, when I'm looking for clothes, I'm looking for something that's one, cozy. I can kind of wear it a lot. Cheap because I don't want to spend too much money on clothes, but durable. So like a lot of the clothes that I have, they're, sweaters, neutral color, nothing too popish where I'm like, I don't want to wear this anymore. But then I think about also like if you go to events, like for my gym at one point we had like a 90s, I think 80s or 90s theme, and it's like dressed up as a flapper or something. I wore it, it didn't fit, I didn't like it, and then it just stayed in my closet and I've never touched it since. So it's like, okay, but I'm not considering, where is this coming from, especially if you're purchasing, how you said, from like bigger companies like Primark and like Amazon. Those are things that you don't consider. You're just like, well, it's cheap, it's 2-day delivery. Hey, why not? So I really like this presentation because I didn't know anything about this topic, and it was nice to kind of dig a little deeper to see the background of, as you said, in different countries, the living wage, and in comparison to what we have here in the U.S. So thanks for sharing.
Yeah, sure. And I just started learning about this a couple of years ago, I think, and I don't even remember what started it. I think it was just starting to get a little bit more into sewing and knitting. And I think I don't know if y'all can see. Oh, well, you can't because of my fake background. There's my hand. So, oh gosh, this is terrifying. I don't know where my hand went, Christine, your face. But if you could see my hand, this is why I don't like fake backgrounds on Zoom. I knit and I started a lot of my items that I love. I'm wearing these fingerless gloves that I've mended because they started wearing out. And I thought, oh my gosh, it took me like 6 hours to knit these things. I don't want to knit a replacement. Can I just fix them? And that's, I think, what started me down the rabbit hole. But you don't have to have any real skill to take care of the clothes that you own. And that's kind of what's fun about that idea of visible mending too, because you can't make it worse. If you've ripped your jeans, you can't make them worse, right? So you can kind of make them funky and fun, and they might not be your nice work event jeans anymore, but you can keep them on your body and use them for different things.
So Mick, what would you recommend for, I guess everyone here on the chat as well as everyone on live, especially now during COVID, like if they want to try something new, is there websites that you use, online platforms when you want to be creative, just to explore more with, the clothes that they do have?
You mean in terms of like mending your clothes?
Mending or just creating, like using the clothes that you do have to like enjoy it and make yourself feel new. As you were mentioning, like some people might go out and buy accessories, to make themselves and their outfit feel better or new. Are there any platforms that you use specifically, maybe online, maybe YouTube or Instagram pages, that can give more ideas to folks listening in?
Frances, that's such a good question, and it makes me feel so old because I'm sure there's YouTube. I do follow like the visible mending hashtag on Instagram, and I get some really good ideas, and there are great tutorials. I think the idea of you know, even like a swap for things like accessories is a great one, because you can toss on a new scarf or you know, a shawl or even a cardigan or whatever. I know I just sound like a grandmother, not that there's
No.
anything like that, but I'm like a brooch, but anything like that that you can swap can make things feel new. But I also encourage us to think about layering and how to wear the things we have in different ways. You know, a dress, a cute dress, you know, suddenly you can put a button down over it and you can tie it at your waist, or there are all different ways you can combine what you have to create new outfits. And I think thinking of fashion as playful in that way can really help as well. I know there are also companies where you can, I think I just got an ad in the mail for something called like Thread Up or something like that, where you can swap clothes or you can sell your clothes online. And those are great too. If you're looking for something new, but you want to not go and support fast fashion, you can buy things that way, or like Rent the Runway. I mean, who am I kidding? I never leave my house, so I don't need that, but other people might. There's a lot of stuff out there for sure. And I see too, one thing I do see a lot is in slow fashion. There's been a lot of talk recently about how white slow fashion is. The models are white, and it's really often catered to like this one aesthetic that's just kind of big shapeless clothes, neutral colors, and that's something that has gotten a lot of pushback recently, which is really good. But I think too, the conversation with slow fashion, a lot of times you'll hear people talk about a capsule wardrobe. So, you know, it's like 20 items that they can all go together. You can make a ton of outfits out of. And that's great, but then people go out and buy a bunch of stuff to make a capsule wardrobe. So like we all have way bigger than a capsule wardrobe in our closets already. So just using what we have in different ways, I think, is a good way to start.
So Mick, I start to think about just things that I'm passing down to my kids already. And this was an awakening for me. So I have a ton of costumes that I buy every year for my kids, but my mom used to make my costumes. So I fell into that convenience factor of just buying things out of convenience because it's there, it's cheap, and not thinking too deep into this. So now I'm pushed to really go back and learn how to sew. I don't know, whip up some Power Ranger costumes or something. But I think it's also important to think about how we're passing this down as we're in this conversation, how we're passing this down to other generations and family members in our community, the importance.
Yeah. Jasmine, that's such a good thing. And I'm going to push back on you and say, like, do not feel like, because the thing is, now, right, there's that gendered labor right now, where as a mom, you feel like you need to now go make your kids clothes, like buy your kids costumes. That's I don't want you to think
It's not only costumes. It's shirts, jeans, shoes.
Right. And kids grow. Y'all, I knit and sew. I do not knit and sew for children, because by the time you're done knitting, they need another one, right? They grow. But like this is where the idea of maybe a swap, like maybe you have friends whose kids have costumes and a bunch of y'all can swap them rather than all of you, and you'll save money too. I mean, that's one thing that's nice. It benefits us. But I don't want anyone, like, I think that's part of this. And that's where I feel like that we need systemic change, because so often those of us who are doing this out of convenience or need start to feel like we're the guilty ones. And that's not, motorcycle just went by, but that's not what I want to come out of this at all, you know, for people to feel guilt or shame because we buy things. Just to think about who we can push, you know, to make change, so that we don't have to worry. Yeah, Jill, what's up?
Well, I'm thinking, correct me if I'm wrong, but wasn't it Kate, the English?
Kate Winslet?
Yeah, that re-wore or wore something twice, and like nobody in that position had done that before. And am I right in?
I don't know.
Okay, but it just makes me think that I think, because what I was shocked about was the statistics that really this is just since 2000 that we have 60% more pieces of clothing in our wardrobes than before 2000. And that's crazy.
Yeah.
That's just growth in such a short period of time. And it would seem like hopefully as the trend, or as it becomes more acceptable to rewear and not feel like every wedding we're invited to, we need to get a new dress or whatever. Just that social, the pressure that what's socially accepted changes too, in addition to everything else that you're saying. Yeah.
Yeah. And all like y'all, this is where we have to think about intersectionality too, because you see people like Mark Zuckerberg or what's his name with Apple, right? Who like had their own, they had, well, I'm just a man and I have my wardrobe and I wear this black turtleneck every day. And people were like, he's just such a visionary. But when women do that, it's like, oh, doesn't she care what she looks like? You know, we have to think, I think about the way gender and race play into this always. Last week, Cori Bush, who is like brand new to the legislature, and she's a Black woman for everyone who's maybe listening and doesn't know. She posted about like, what am I supposed to do to get a congressional appropriate wardrobe? And slow fashion folks, like people who talk about this stuff, were just applauding, like, isn't this wonderful? Because AOC and a bunch of other lawmakers who were also women of color were jumping in saying like, don't worry about it, go thrifting. It was Kate Blanchett, thanks Cheryl. It was, you know, all of these women who are also women of color were saying like, go thrifting, here's a good place I like, and all this stuff. And that's great. But this wasn't about slow fashion. This was about systemic oppression and the way that white supremacy has made it so that BIPOC women are systemically making less their whole lives, so that they have to spend so much money to even just get into Congress that they can't afford to buy the clothing they need. Like, so this is again what I mean about thinking about intersectionality and how we can't shop our way out of this. We can't just say, oh, it's just slow fashion and we just do that. We just buy things from slow. No, that's not going to do it. And it's really important to consider all of those factors because it's complicated, just like everything else.
And that's what I really liked about your presentation. Like we've talked about this for a number of years together, and you got me into mending. But so often when I've thought about this particular issue, it really does put everything on the individual, and you really feel like a failure pretty much immediately. And so that's what I really appreciate about your presentation, is that it, you know, we do need to change our consumer choices and our behaviors, but we're not going to be able to buy our way out of it, because that really is predicated on the idea of, you know, $50 to $80 plain white t-shirts. That's just not affordable for everyone,
right?
Most people. And that we really need systemic changes, and we really need a cultural shift about things being enough, you know?
Yeah.
And so I definitely appreciate that.
Yeah, that's such a good point. And we are going to be talking
about your point.
Well, you stated it so nicely, though. We are going to be talking in December. We haven't decided on the date yet, but we are going to be doing a little bit of a longer conversation about capitalism and consumerism, and why our anti-racism also has to be anti-capitalist, and like how these things come together. So that's just some of the programming that we're doing in the future about this topic. That won't be specifically about fashion, but we'll be talking about capitalism and consumerism. Dress for Success. Jasmine, do you want to say like a little bit about, oh, that wasn't you. I'm not sure who put.
That was me.
Oh, okay. Bob, do you want to tell us like a little bit about what Dress for Success is?
Let me turn my video on so people can see me. I was a marketing manager for the West Manchester Mall when it was around. And we would, Dress for Success is like donated business professional clothing for women getting back into the workforce.
Yeah.
So they had a chapter in Harrisburg, and we would host a big, obviously use mall space. We had the racks, we had empty, at the West Manchester Mall, we had plenty of empty store space. And I guess, and again, you got to forgive me because this was like 12 years ago. I think women would come in that are like, again, like looking to go on job interviews, that are just new to the workforce, that needed that wardrobe, would come in and pick out clothes. And they were really nice. They were donated clothes, but they were cleaned and dry cleaned. And, you know, it's almost like a recycling of clothing and I think that's, when you're saying about the wardrobe for the congressional wardrobe, that kind of popped in my mind, for not necessarily at that level, but just for entry level girls and women getting back into the workforce.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, that sounds like a great organization. I've heard of it, but I'm not super familiar with it.
It just popped in my head. I don't know if they're still around. I think they are. I
I
guess.
think they are. I'm pretty sure I've heard of them. So yeah, thanks, Bob. That's a good idea of like place to support and think about. And you do see, one thing that I'm seeing more and more is that like right now it's so easy to shop from home. Like Francis, you mentioned Amazon. Like my phone's probably going to tell me like a bunch of, I'm probably going to have ads from Amazon because I swear it's listening to me. So it's everywhere. Like we are just inundated. It used to be if you wanted new clothes, you had to go and like get measured and someone would make it. It's so instant now. I can buy something from Amazon today and it'll be at my house tomorrow. It's so easy to spend our money. So that's like we have to put that mindfulness back in. But Christine, like you said, it's so hard to feel like things are enough when we're constantly being told we need to buy. And right now we're being told you have to support local businesses because of COVID. And yes, we do. But also like we value capitalism so much that we're not willing to just give people a living wage so they can stay home. Instead, we're saying buy, so it's wrapped up in everything. I can go on about anti-capitalism forever, and I will in a couple weeks, apparently.
I think too about like reusables, where my friends didn't go and buy new things. They looked at, this is the size my kid is right now.
Yeah.
I'm gonna buy something for the winter,
Yeah.
and that they also value volunteerism, because if you volunteer, then you get to go earlier or different things and set up and get first pick. And
Nice.
I know families that have just done all their shopping through what other people have used, and it was
Yeah.
thrifty. It was, they didn't spend a whole lot, and helpful.
Yeah, that's a great organization, Cheryl. And I think too, it also what you're pointing out is I think there can also be a stigma for people that there's something shameful, right? We perpetuate the myth that there's something shameful about thrifting or about using an organization, that we use kind of buying and spending a lot as a status symbol or even kind of a stand-in for our own worth. And I think that's such a big part of American culture, that it can be hard to challenge. Like when I'm trying to change my mindset, and now when I wear a t-shirt and I realize I have had this t-shirt for 20 years, I'm like, yeah, t-shirt. Like I feel so good that this old t-shirt is worn, and my mending pile is getting enormous. And sometimes I'll look at it and say, okay, those are really cheap socks. It's not worth my time to mend it. So like, but again, like Christine, I think there's a big tie to the way we talk about climate change, because we put the pressure on individuals and don't recognize that it is these billion-dollar organizations that do the bulk of the you and I can recycle our hearts out, and we can eat less meat and we can bike and all that stuff, but we're not going to put a dent in real change because we need structural change. I don't want to keep talking because I feel like we've talked a lot, but if anyone has more to say, please do. I just don't want y'all to feel like you have to stay until 4:30. If you feel ready, it's okay to go at 4:23.
I appreciate also, Mick, how you tied the environment to clothes, because that is something it just never came on my radar. And shame on me, but I appreciate you tying all that together.
Yeah, and no shame, Cheryl. I mean, we are specifically kept from this information. The clothing, there used to be a lot more clothing manufacturing in the United States, but like many things, we've shifted overseas where we can get away with so much more and treat people so much more poorly, and treat the environment much worse because of lack of regulation. So no shame on you or any of us for not knowing. We are specifically kept from knowing.
Well, if there's any hope, I have a 16-year-old that loves shopping at Community Aid, and her and all her friends go.
Nice.
And loves thrifting, so to speak. So
yeah,
it may be a thing with high schoolers right now.
Cool. My son does it too, Bob.
Yeah.
Oh no,
I took him
all around. It's just great.
Yeah.
Oh yeah,
Because what's old is new again, right?
literally.
I have ties from the 1970s. That should break out someday, but
I go there to get my sweaters. They have some nice sweaters in there, warm sweaters too.
well,
Thank
maybe
you
that goes
so
back
much.
to the conversation of, things were probably better made years ago. They last longer. Nowadays, things are so cheap. I mean, everything is not just clothing, but appliances. And,
Yep.
I have a hot water heater, a place we have in Maryland that's from 1976. And a hot water heater, a plumber told me now things have changed, the regulations have changed, and they don't last more than like 10 years.
Yeah.
So it's like everything.
I forget what it's called. Oh, a planned obsolescence. Right? That's what it's
Yeah.
called, planned obsolescence, when it's, a phone or whatever. And I mean, look at iPhones. They're constantly coming out with new ones. There's barely a change, but we're like, oh, I need to get that iPhone 37 or whatever it is because we need it. We don't want to be the only one without it. I mean, this manufactured need is really damaging.
I even think about like social media and like the role that it plays when it comes to all of this, because again, if there's a new iPhone, it's being advertised in every single platform. You're getting ads about it without you even, reaching out to them and saying, hey, I want a phone. Here's an ad because I'm talking about an iPhone. So social media, can have a positive, impact, but then yet again, it could also have a negative impact depending on, who the viewers are and who are the folks sending out the messages. So
Absolutely. Such a good point. Thank you so much for coming and for this conversation, everyone. I really appreciated it. And just feel free to Google those ideas I mentioned. Please come in December if you can. But I really appreciated all of your thoughts and your questions and your input. It was great.
Thanks, Mick.
Thank you, Meg.
Thank you.
Thank
Have a good
you.
one. Don't forget to donate, everyone watching on Facebook, please.
Take care, guys. Happy Thanksgiving to all.
Bye, you too.